This event shares findings from articles that were selected as finalists for the 2025 Rosabeth Moss Kanter Award for Excellence in Work-Family Research. I'm Katie Collins. I'm WFRN's co-vice president with the fabulous Leah Ruppanner, and I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of WFRN's leadership team, our president, Jennifer Hook, and executive director, Steve Sweet. A few things before we jump in today. I apologize for having caught my daughter's daycare cold that you are enjoying now, at least for virtual. By joining us today, I should mention that you are consenting to recording, which will be posted on WFRN's YouTube channel. I'll drop the link in the chat for you. What else? I also want to acknowledge that our events are made possible by the generous support of our members like you, of course. I sound like I'm on a TV show. If you're not a member yet or you need to renew, I encourage you to check out our website to learn more. I'll pop the link for membership into the chat as well. There we are. Third, please save the date for our next VCS event, which is going to be Thursday, November 13th, which is Friday morning for some of you, on best practices in community engaged research for work family scholars. And this is organized by Marissa Young and moderated by Kim Delott, featuring 4 wonderful researchers, Erin Kelly, Jenny Povey, Naomi Lightman, and Haley Christian. Here's the link to that if you'd like to register. And finally, I want to plug the next WFRN conference, which will be June 17th to 21st, 2026 at Concordia University in Montreal. The deadline for submissions is coming up soon on October 1st, and we encourage you to submit both papers and sessions for the conference. And with that, I'd like to introduce our organizer and moderator, Jeremy Reynolds, who was co-chair of the 2025 Kanter Award Committee. Take it away, Jeremy.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, so I was co-chair this year with Dr. Shelley McDermott Wadsworth, and we would like to thank WFRN President Jennifer Hook for starting this tradition of having a virtual event that celebrates the papers and authors that have been nominated for the Kanter Award. Thank you also, of course, to Katie and Leah for helping to plan this event, and of course, thank you to Steve Sweet for making this all happen. We couldn't do any of this without his work in the background. Thank you also to the Boston College Center for Work and Family for supporting the Kanter Award since its creation in the year 2000. Special thanks to Jennifer Fraone, who's led that effort since 2005. The Kanter Award has grown and thrived over the past 25 years, in large part, due to her generous support. And we're especially thankful for the work she does to recruit corporate reviewers through the Boston College Workforce Roundtable. The Kanter Award wouldn't be the same without input from them. Jennifer is here with us today. She'd like to say a few words, I believe.
Thank you, Jeremy. The Kanter Award has really enabled us to stay aware of the groundbreaking research that's being done and to connect the corporate leaders in our BC Workforce Roundtable with both the researchers and their findings. So thank you very much for your partnership over these years.
Thank you. Before we get started, I'd like to say just a little bit about the history of the Kanter Award and how the winners are chosen, just in case some of you are not familiar with it. The Rosabeth Moss Kanter Award for Excellence in Work-Family Research was created by Dr. Shelley McDermott Wadsworth, and it's named after Dr. Rosabeth Moss Kanter, who was instrumental in starting the modern field of work-family research. The award was first given in the year 2000 and has been given annually every year since to highlight and celebrate the best empirical work-family articles that are published each year. So the award has just celebrated its 25th anniversary. The review process for the award is rather unusual and extremely rigorous. So rather than soliciting nominations, we recruit an international and interdisciplinary panel of reviewers. There are usually over 70 of them. And we ask them to scour over 60 journals and potentially other sources that they're familiar with to identify the research that they find truly outstanding that is about work-family issues. This year, that meant that those reviewers combed through well over 5,000 articles looking for the best ones. And we encourage reviewers to nominate one article at most. So things move quickly after they start looking for articles. The articles that they nominate are all scored by a subgroup of reviewers, and then they are reviewed and scored again by the entire panel of 70 plus reviewers. And then we combine those scores with feedback from the corporate reviewers to select finalists and the winner. If you'd like to know more about the papers that have been nominated for the award or won the award over the years, please visit the Kanter Award website hosted by the Center for Families at Purdue University. I put a link at the top of the chat about that. I'm also very excited to announce that we now have a new tool that's free and available to everybody. This is a Zotero library of all of the top papers that have been nominated for this award over the past 25 years. You can go to the Center for Families website at Purdue and download that file. And we hope this will make it easier for people to find and cite the best work-family research in their research and teaching. We're always looking for new reviewers. We're very interested in maintaining a pool of reviewers from all over the world. So please get in touch with me if you or someone you know would like to be a reviewer. We're especially interested in new reviewers living in Asia, Africa, Central or South America, or Eastern Europe. Those areas are not as well represented as we might like at the moment. All right, so now the part you've all been waiting for, it's time to hear about some of the finalists in this year's competition and the fantastic research that they did. I'd like to start by mentioning the lead author on this year's winning article, Dr. Wendong Li. Dr. Li is Associate Professor in the Department of Management at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Dr. Li had planned to join us today, but he was ultimately unable to make it. Nevertheless, I hope you will all go and read the research that his team produced. It's really fantastic. He and his co-authors examine how personality traits, things like extroversion, influence experiences of work-family conflict and facilitation, and how work-family conflict and facilitation can actually change personality traits even into late adulthood. So I think this article should be required reading for people who are experiencing work-family conflict, and also for organizational leaders who want to make sure they don't accidentally ruin the employees that they worked so hard to recruit and train. I'd like to also mention Dr. Al James. He was a finalist for the award this year. He's professor of economic geography and director of research in geography at Newcastle University in the UK. His article examines the experiences of women engaged in online gig platform work through sites like Upwork and Freelancer. And the article focuses on comparing women's experiences with that type of gig work and their experiences with conventional jobs and the tactics they use to help minimize or reduce work-family conflict. So if you want to know about how gig work and work-family conflict are related, and whether his respondents actually ended up with the flexibility that they were hoping to get from that gig work, you can go read his article. You can also learn about his larger research project at his website. It's called geoworklives.com. That's GEO, worklives, all one word, .com. All right, so now for the best part of today's event. We are very fortunate to have two authors from the two top papers today with us. They'll each present their work, and following their presentations, we'll have time for questions and answers. So please make a note of your questions and have them ready for later. I'm excited to have a conversation with both of these authors. I'd like to introduce Dr. Lauren Klingen first. She earned her PhD in sociology from Princeton University in 2025, and she is now a postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Research on Social Inequalities at Sciences Po in Paris. So thank you, Dr. Klingen, for being with us today. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Dr. Klingen, and she will present her work.
Thank you. Let me work to share my screen. Are you all able to see that okay? All right. Well, it's a pleasure and honor to be here with you today. I'm Dr. Lauren Klingen. I'm spending this year as a postdoctoral research fellow at Sciences Po. And for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm delighted to walk you through a paper of mine on how households define women's incomes, household disruptions, and gendered resolutions. This paper offers an answer to the question, do women's wages buy domestic power? It's an especially important question today because globally, rates of women's employment and women's breadwinning have been on the rise. Women's breadwinning is not new, but it has become more commonplace. Not only have more privileged women entered the workforce, but women's breadwinning has risen alongside declines in stable, well-paying jobs and supportive social policies. You may know that the quantitative research testing this question is mixed. So why wouldn't women's wages buy domestic power? By domestic power, I mean authority, the ability to influence or control actions of other household members. We often measure this in time spent on housework, financial control, and decision-making. Breadwinning has been a long-standing source of men's domestic power. But what Denise Candioti called the patriarchal bargain is breaking down. Many men can't provide for their families, at least not alone, and many are not primary providers. Families frequently share the work of breadwinning across gender. My research finds that families respond to the breakdown of the patriarchal bargain with gendered resolutions. These are family-level strategies for adapting materially to gendered economic change while resolving culturally the potential disruption to men's domestic power. In the case of women's incomes, gendered resolutions happen through how families define and use women's wages, a relational mechanism not captured when we look solely at quantitative measures of earnings. So let me show you what this looks like in the United Arab Emirates, or UAE, where I interviewed 64 men and women, both married and unmarried. The UAE is a strategic site for studying how families are adapting to the rise of women's employment and breadwinning. This is because the UAE offers an extreme case of the men's breadwinning norm. As elsewhere, this norm is culturally and religiously enforced. And in the UAE, husbands and fathers are also required by law to provide for their families, while women are not, except in extreme circumstances. Across the globe, men's sole breadwinning has been challenged by structural shifts. In the UAE, a series of state reforms, including pushing men out of public employment while dramatically increasing public employment of women, have made this challenge especially stark. Overall, Emirati women's formal labor force participation rose from 2% in 1975 to 33% in 2019. Rates are especially high for young adult women between the ages of 25 and 39 years old, with the majority of those women in the workforce. These twin features, a strong cultural and legal mandate for men's breadwinning, challenged by the dramatic introduction of women's wages into family budgets, are what make the UAE such a useful case for examining the meaning families give to women's incomes. Now let's return to gender resolutions and what they look like in Emirati families. I'd like to tell you about Sarah, a mother of 3. After an unsuccessful move to Dubai, where Sarah and her husband both held jobs, the couple moved back home and in with Sarah's in-laws. This was a temporary doubling up living situation, since the young couple couldn't quite afford a house of their own. Seeing this, Sarah spoke with her husband about contributing to the household, but her husband was unreceptive. about pitching in for that house of their own, Sarah told me, "He can't alone because it's a big project. I'm telling him, but he doesn't listen to me. He's one of those people, I'll do everything." Sarah decided to resume her human resources career and pitch in anyway. She secretly covered part of the cost of constructing their marital home, a process she described in a low, halting voice. "I collect most of my salary and I give it to my brother. He has a construction company. He's doing my house." "I'm telling my brother," Sarah said, "to not tell my husband or to reduce the amount, and I'll pay you. So what to do?" Sarah's strategy exemplifies a gendered resolution, showing how spending women's money on household needs while concealing their contributions helps maintain family myths of men's breadwinning. Note that this relational process involves not only a married couple, but also a third party, Sarah's brother, who facilitates her secret contributions by preparing discounted invoices for his brother-in-law. This is a gendered resolution, and it offers one explanation for the disconnect between women's wages, women's breadwinning, and women's domestic power. Concealing women's contributions means they don't receive credit for them. More specifically, it means crediting men for women's contributions and leaving men's authority uncontested. Now, we typically think of domestic power being negotiated in marriages or between cohabitating partners, but families are adapting to declines in men's breadwinning by incorporating unmarried women's wages as well. Leah, 22, works at a public university and lives with her natal family, a conventional living arrangement for unmarried Emiratis. Reflecting expectations of women's altruism and duty to family that are at odds with expectations of men's breadwinning, Leah feels that her income belongs to her household, telling me, "The only person who's working is their daughter. So for me, my salary means it's the salary of the whole household as well." Leah helps cover her parents' basic needs, giving money directly to her mother and father. Her mother retired years earlier, at her husband's behest, to care for a son with disabilities. Meanwhile, Leah's father seems embarrassed to ask his daughter for money, but the state recently forced him into early retirement with a reduced pension. Now, Leah's father uses his daughter's contributions to keep up appearances in front of his wife, asking Leah for money to buy his wife items as expensive as a car. Leah grants her father these private requests, assuming he wouldn't ask if it weren't necessary, and not wanting to shame him. She sees that as the father in the household, knowing that he was able to give her the best before and not now, it's tricky for him, like that transition. Leah knows that these financial flows have the potential to upset their family's power dynamic. Since her father retired, Leah's parents have started cutting back on expenses, and their daughter, a fresh university graduate, has become an important source of income. Yet neither parent wants to write a new family story of dependence on their 22-year-old daughter. As Leah noted, for both of my parents, it is something on their mind that they don't want that kind of relationship with their daughter. Thus, when Leah's father asked for money to buy her mother a car, she said, "He asked me once and he won't ask again. Like, I don't want to ask my daughter to lend me money to buy my wife something." Leah's covert contributions, her financial support and discretion, help her parents navigate a difficult transition, emblematic of the gendered economic transformations sweeping through the UAE and across the globe. That's why these are gendered resolutions, relational strategies for navigating declines in men's breadwinning while saving face for men and without disrupting men's dominance. So when you leave this session, I'd like you to keep in mind two key takeaways. Relational work drives gendered resolutions. how families use and define women's incomes can undermine their potential to buy power and disrupt men's dominance. We need to pay just as much attention to how women's incomes are spent and defined in relevant relationships as we do how much women earn. Second, we gain analytic leverage when we expand the unit of analysis to extended family. Studies of household finances typically capture how women's wages are negotiated in couples. We would do well to also learn from studies in the Global South that show how women's wages flow across horizontal and vertical family ties. My study finds that unmarried daughters and sisters prop up household economies and family myths of men's breadwinning, as do third parties like brothers, banks, and vendors. Couples are the tip of the iceberg. Family ties and obligations are wider and more complex. At this point, you might be wondering, shouldn't women's money buy them some power? My answer is yes. Women's money buys them the power to avoid forming new relationships. It enables women to delay marriage, to cut off engagements after getting to know a fiancé, to choose a spouse carefully, or decide not to marry. However insufficient, women's savings and investments provide them with a personal safety net that is neither the state nor family. When I checked in with Leah 5 years later, she shared that she had taken on new household expenses. Leah was now responsible for the family's water, electricity, groceries, salaries for a maid and her brother's caretaker, a monthly allowance for her sister, and her sister's school fees. She called these contributions, quote, almost like an unspoken agreement. But Leah had also purchased a room, or rather an apartment, of her own. Now 28, Leah was concerned that she had not yet found a husband. Leah was overwhelmed by the realization that she did not have family to rely on. Rather, her family relied on her. And she wanted to, quote, make sure I have a space for myself when her parents were no longer living. Leah's mother knew about the apartment purchase, but her father did not. Leah figured it wasn't too important because she wouldn't live there anyway. Her father liked to tell her she would only leave the family home if she got married or if she got buried. For now, Leah planned to rent the apartment, treating it as an investment in her family now and her future later. See how women's money empowers them to reject new relationships, like marriage, but upholds gender inequality in existing family relations. Now for Leah, expectations of altruism and duty to family pushed her to prop up her retired father's provision. Most unmarried women reported feeling similarly compelled to spend on their parents and siblings. Their brothers did not. Why? Because young men, as future breadwinners, should save up for marriage. Released from such expectations, unmarried daughters and sisters were pushed to provide in the present. Some unmarried women reported being their family's primary providers. Others paid for cars, rent, maids' wages, utilities, groceries, siblings' allowances, and more. Even so, men and women continued to speak of Emirati women as spoiled spendthrifts. The morally dubious picture they painted overshadowed women's actual contributions. It colored how women talked about their domestic arrangements, even as the most excessive shoppers traded designer slippers for organic diapers when push came to shove. The spoiled woman stereotype infiltrated the workplace too, with employers judging Emirati women over women of other nationalities as undeserving because of their expected consumption. This is a final point I hope you'll carry away. This relational analysis can be extended from the domestic sphere into the labor market, where employers make hiring and compensation decisions. As Hind reported, Her coworkers judge Emirati women candidates specifically on their observable consumption, commenting, for example, "She looks spoiled. Is she really going to take her high heels off? Like, you know, this job requires a lot of walking." Assuming because she wears high heels, because she has the high-end brand handbags, and she wears makeup, that she's not really going to do the work. We know about pay gaps, motherhood penalties, and daddy bonuses, and many of the mechanisms driving each. Gendered consumption norms and stereotypes may be at work as well. In cosmopolitan labor markets, like we have in the UAE, these stereotypes may impact some nationalities or racialized groups more than others. And they may travel more or less seamlessly between so-called public and private spheres. In households and workplaces, then, gendered resolutions help preserve men's authority, saving face for men even as breadwinning becomes women's work. So there we have it. Relational work drives gendered resolutions through two mechanisms. One is through concealment, hiding or obscuring women's contributions to uphold family myths of men's breadwinning. The other is through consumption norms, shaming women for spending extravagantly while pressuring them to spend altruistically. These are insights we can apply to the workplace. Finally, we gain a more complete, insightful view of changes in breadwinning by looking at extended families, financial relations, both horizontal and intergenerational. Thus, in new work on poor and middle-class families in Nairobi, Kenya, I'm zooming in on this generation of women's breadwinning. To conclude, without this networked view, we might miss a new generation of breadwinners, young, unmarried women working to protect their families from the challenges of economic change. I dedicate this presentation to these women and the families for whom they provide, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I can't wait to get to the Q&A to hear more about your research. At this point, we're going to move on to our second presentation. Dr. Ellen Kosick is the Basil S. Turner Distinguished Professor Emerita of Management in the Daniel School of Business at Purdue University. She is currently a fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. Thank you so much, Ellen, for joining us today. Everyone, please help me welcome Dr. Ellen Kosick.
Hi, I'm going to try and share my screen and let's hope it works. I've got the PowerPoint open. Let's try and open it again. One sec. I may have you help me share if for some reason we can't pull it up. Can you see? Do you see this? Does this look good to you? Can you see
Yeah.
Yep.
Everything's looking good?
Yeah, just start the slideshow, I think, and we're good.
Yay. Okay. Well, I'm in California. It's about 8:30 a.m. here. I got up 5:30 a.m. to get ready for this. And today we're going to talk about how do you put and implement flexibility in a way that affects all workers, even if they don't have flexible jobs? How can you improve support? And how can we leverage supervisors' understanding of flexibility to create work-life supportive contexts? So I think what's very interesting, and we all saw this during the pandemic, is that the organizations were a little bit more supportive of personal life, particularly as people are forced into either remote work, and even workers that were frontline workers, very stressful jobs, but they there was some, at least emotional support in some cases. Remember, we talked about our nursing employees as heroes or people in frontline jobs. But then it seems like we kind of forgot all that. And this study was done in a university where we built on research that I've done previously with people from the Work Family Health Network and some other work I've done with the Center for Creative Leadership on designing training interventions to help improve supervisors' understanding of how to support flexibility. So the idea is to think about how do you advance work-life supportive contexts for the haves. So those are people like us, many faculty. We may not have flexibility in the nights that we teach or during the day, but we do have some control over our work-life boundaries and schedules. And then the have-nots are people that have to show up and have to do frontline work. And then when things happen or in their personal life, they're not able to adjust. So in a university, think about janitors, think about people that are finance people in the office that help you with your bill, or the secretaries. And so the idea is to really think about work-life context, looking at both the culture of how supervisors think about flexibility and then the job design. And what we find, and this is the headline, is many organizations think that if you just offer flexibility, you don't have to do anything. The usual practice, we find that training supervisors is a key intervention, and you can think about it preventatively at the work group level. Often we just react to flexibility problems when they occur. And secondly, if you train leaders or supervisors, there are different effects. Not everybody benefits the same way. And one key moderator determinant is whether you're in a job that's flexible, you're more likely to feel comfortable engaging with your family role. And if you're in a job that's not flexible, you have less emotional exhaustion. All right, and sometimes these freeze. So if it freezes, it looks like mine. Oh, there you go. So these are my colleagues that worked on this project. Everyone in this picture was at Purdue University at some point in their life. Caitlyn Porter is now at University of Missouri, Kansas City. Lindsay Rosoka is still at Purdue University, and she was a doctoral student, I believe, when this started. Kelly Wilson's a colleague at Purdue University in the business school, and Deborah Rupp was at Purdue in psychology, and now she's at George Mason. And Jared Law Penrose is out at Lemoyne University and is was a PhD student as well. And this published in Human Resource Management. So here's the dilemma that many employers face in implementing flexibility. One is that they think that if employees are in jobs with limited opportunities, they can't do anything to really help people and mitigate burnout. And yet, we should be doing something, right? For people, we're a total organization. So this idea of the haves and have-nots kind of disturbed us as well. All right, next slide here. The second dilemma, and we've all been guilty of this, is that even when we have jobs with flexibility, we sometimes don't use the flexibility that we have. I'm going to see if I can hide this panel. If people are having any issues seeing anything, please let me know. And so here's a mother who is at home, and if we can move the panel here, she's working on her laptop, but she's really not engaging with her kids as well, but at least she's able to work flexibly at home. And we've all been probably guilty of this, even as professors, thinking about our work even when we are home, just to meet people at the school bus. So why is it that people sometimes don't use the flexibility they have? A third dilemma is that these issues are exacerbated when supervisors are unsure of their role in supporting work-life flexibility. And it was much easier when, supervisors really didn't have to think about supporting work and life as part of their job. And I think there's still some ambivalence about this, and companies don't always see that how helping people with their supporting their non-work roles helps the firm. Further, work-life flexibility is a very vague concept, and I think we're still struggling with how to measure it. I did do a review with Matt Perugino, who's a former Purdue doctoral student, who's now at SUNY New York, and Brenda Lauch at Simon Fraser, that was published in Journal of Management. And you could think of all different forms of flexibility in terms of control over the work role boundary. So when you control when you have to log on or off, or the amount of work that you overtime you have to work that's invading in your personal life hours, that's boundary control. If you can control your work schedule, such as when you work, like flex time, that's schedule control. Those are the two forms we focus on in this study, but there are other forms as well, such as workload control, or the amount of work you do, for example, and location control. We did not look at location of where people worked in this study, but schedule flexibility was more that you could control when you had to be at work or not. But certainly these access to control are often bundled, that when you can control time, you can also have some control place. And so our definition of flexibility is the ability to manage where and when one works, and it's a resource that provides employees the ability to control the work-life boundary. And Tammy Allen did a very good paper in Personal Psychology with colleagues on the flexibility, and also used the boundary control view of flexibility. And what's very bad or sort of troublesome is that in terms of linkages to work-family conflict, the availability of formal flexibility policies has a greater impact on reducing work-family conflict than actual use. Let me say that again. If you measure whether an employee has access to flexibility, they will report lower work-family conflict than if you measure whether an employee uses flexibility. And we think that that's partially related to implementation challenges. So we argue that each dilemma, whether employees have flexibility, but they don't use it enough to engage in their family role, or they have nots, that they have an inflexible job, but they need some work-life support, even to feel that they can have social support from their leader, or that leaders see flexibility as part of their role, is something that can be solved through work-life interventions at the organization. And training is an important intervention. It may seem very modest, but we do very little to help supervisors understand how to implement flexibility. And we need to do more and more training, both of supervisors, and I think in future studies, teams and workers could also be trained about what does a work-life supportive context mean. And it's one where work gets done, but it's also one where we adapt to people's personal needs. So in terms of theory, you can think about job demands resource theory, where you have demands and roles that you have to do at home, at work, that are stressful but important to carry out your role. And then resources would be culture and support at work to help you get it done. And we argue that when organizations provide work-life supportive training to supervisors, it promotes a work-life supportive context. It both signals that the organization is supportive of employees managing their work-life interface, and this also helps workers change their perceptions of support, and it mitigates burnout for those with limited work-life flexibility, those have-nots, and promotes engagement. And we thought engagement in both work and home roles for those with greater flexibility, but there will be an interesting finding, so stay tuned on whether that happens or not. One thing that's very important to emphasize here is that we think that companies focus on just making flexibility policies available as a benefit, but it is not sufficient enough in promoting employees' perceptions of work-life support. And a key factor in contributing to employees' use is their supervisors' use and support of flexibility. And particularly now, as the economy is downturning, I think there's more can't use the policies that they have, or companies are understaffed, so those in frontline jobs are increasingly overworked. So for work-life flexibility to be effective in promoting employee well-being and engagement, employees and supervisors need to perceive that the organization is supportive. Now, this is also important to point out that in this study, we are training supervisors, but our dependent variable is measuring the change in employees' exhaustion, and also their change in engagement. So many intervention studies give the intervention to the person, like you do a mindfulness training course, and then I'll measure, a few months later, are you more mindful? Here we're changing the context. We're training leaders, so it's like training parents and hoping that children perceive their parents are more supportive. Here we're training leaders and hoping that there's some change in the work context. And that the effects of the training vary depending on your access to work-life flexibility and job design. So the work context has a lot of stressors, and these are both structural, whether your job's flexible or not, and also cultural, whether you believe there's support for work in personal life. And in other studies that we've done, if you think about depression or exhaustion, it is linked in terms of health and well-being. And so the workplace is a critical point of intervention for reducing work-family conflict and enhancing productivity. And we tend to think that when employees have work-life problems in managing roles, that it's because they didn't do a good job, organizing themselves. And we think we need to proactively change the workplace to help people manage all that they need to do. So the training today is really focused on culture, supportive supervisors, and climate. And then you could think about the access to flexibility, whether you have a job role that lets you have some flexibility in scheduling, for example, or not, is a structural factor. And we think it's important to look at both these changes together, or at least the structural factor in this case as a moderator. And then in future studies, could we provide more flexibility for different types of workers? And this is a critical issue right now as we are having, for example, return to the office battles and other issues in implementing flexibility. We believe that managers are the linchpin for intervention. And in previous work that I've done with Leslie Hammer, we find that if you ask employees, or if you ask managers, how supportive are you of work and life? Surprise, surprise, 100% of them think that they are supportive. And only yet 50% of those employees think that they're supportive. So there is a perceptual gap. And training leaders that this is part of their job and helping them learn behaviors is a way to to close the gap. And organizations depend on people, managers of employees, to interpret and apply human resource policies and practices, of which flexibility is one. So our model here in the headline again is that if you, rather than wait for problems and flexibility as you're implementing these policies, or just to retool and have a strong implementation, you need to proactively train leaders, and there will be differential effect on frontline leaders or in the hybrid or people with more flexible schedules. And so our model here found, or we thought that, and we measured if supervisors received any training, because you can't really, you got to make this sort of a voluntary intervention, offering it, because if you force managers to do things, it's not how you get change in attitude. And also the organization we worked with wanted us to make this, voluntary training. And so if we compared 17 departments, employees in 17 departments, and in 2/3 of them, the training was offered. And then we had control group departments, and we collected baseline survey data at time 1, which I'll show you in March of 1 year. And so we knew the context before we did the training, and then we offered the training in the fall. And then the next March, we measured again for these same employees, repeated measures. And so schedule control and boundary control were the aspects of flexibility that we measured. And then our outcomes were emotional exhaustion. It's like I feel used up at the end of the day, for example, or family engagement. I have time to engage in my family role. And then work engagement, we also measured whether people felt engaged in their work role. And we view supervisor training as a resource. And if you have a trained supervisor, that's a resource, just like having access to flexibility is a resource. And it buffers personal strain and compensates for lack of resources and flexibility for people that don't have control over flexibility. And it facilitates employees to pull personal resources to increase engagement when they have a trained supervisor. So once again, large university, 17 departments, 12 are randomly assigned to the intervention. And so we're just comparing usual practice, 2 surveys a year apart in 5 departments. What were the work exhaustion and engagement outcomes for employees comparing to the previous year? And then in those 12 departments, we were their supervisors in those departments have been trained. The intervention I think you'll be interested in. We offered a passport as a way to get people to be motivated in training. So we had a module 1 that I designed online, which was an overview of why work-life training and flexibility is an important issue. We also had them do an assessment that I developed with the Center for Creative Leadership, manage your boundary management style, because a lot of universities use a lot of email and other online work to get work done. And I'll give you a very high level introduction to that. And then we also then provided those support on family supportive behaviors, training leaders on how to be supportive. And we had them track their behaviors after the online modules. So the modules only took about 45 minutes or so to each, and then they set goals, and we used the idea of cognitive behavioral self-monitoring to send them tips or a reminder, have you done any goals today? Then I did a face-to-face session that I led for about an hour and a half, where anybody who had been trained could come. And we had them prepare a story or a summary of their personal experience managing boundaries or providing support. So that was the intervention. It was about, all in all, I would say, a total of 4 hours of training, maybe a little bit less. What we were trained in again? These family supportive supervisor behaviors, which is something that I've worked on for a long time with Dr. Leslie Hammer. And these are the 4 behaviors that you train managers in these behaviors that makes them employees feel more supportive. One is emotional support. So we train leaders to increase face-to-face contact with employees and communicate genuine concern, because you're unlikely to hear about what's happening in people's personal life if you're not talking to your workers. We also encourage leaders to become more familiar with employee schedule needs and also the policies. We then also had them schedule goals for 10 minutes a day after the training was done, and said, did you do any of these goals? And so we train them not only in family and personal support, and there are 2 other behaviors I will share with you for family and personal support, but we also train them in these same ideas for support in the job. Like, are you supporting your employees with getting their job done? Are you helping them get the tools they need? Because the idea of work-family spillover is that if you have a bad, if you're having stress at work, you're going to bring that home. And we think that's an important part of training. We also trained them, the second part was this boundary management, and this is a model that with time constraints, I can't go through all of it today, but there's a lot online at Purdue. But basically, I call it Flex Styles, or the Center for Creative Leadership. We also called it Work-Life Integrator. And we teach people how to manage boundaries to have more control. The degree to which you feel in control of managing boundaries with work and personal life. And we've normed this on a psychological assessment of about 1,000 employees. And we find that people that perceive they have low control over their family or work boundaries tend to have more problems in well-being. And then we also have them think about if they're able to manage boundaries that support what matters to them. And companies used to assume that people were just work identity focused. And now many people are equally focused on work and personal life, dual focus. But there is variation. And even I found that even single employees and students can be very non-work focused. So this is another thing we have to train leaders to understand. Then the last thing is integration separation. So people have a boundary management style. It's the degree you might mix communications and thoughts between work and non-work. And some of us you could listen to right now and think about whether you're an integrator, mixing work and non-work communications all day long. So your day is like this in terms of communications. Separators work in chunks and really don't look at when they're at work at family emails very much or texts, and just look at them at lunch. Many people can't do that. For example, if they're a single parent. And then work firsters are always taking work communications, but less so family communications, and the reverse for family. And then we have cyclers, are people that have heavy deadlines, like think about closing the books at the university, the start of the semester. And then we also teach them about, what matters for well-being in terms of who's the most unhappy. And what we find is that people that are interrupted the most by work and people that are the most interrupted by work and non-work. So these are the reactors, the people that have high family role needs, such as working parents and elder caregivers, and also people that have high work role needs. The overwhelmed reactors have higher family to work conflict, work family conflict, want to quit their jobs, the psychological distress. So this was all in the training. Then the workshop we held, and I had them introduce themselves, share their boundary management style, talk about their leader style for family supportive behaviors, and tell a story, and develop then a practical application. And all of our results after that training, which was again done in October after measuring a baseline survey, we then resurveyed the employees several months later, and all of our hypotheses were supportive, except work engagement did not improve. What did improve, or what the headline is that training managers enhances family engagement for employees with high schedule control over boundaries and as well, and training managers for workers with less flexibility access did engage in their families more. But we need other interventions for work engagement. So the agenda for the future is to address what we don't know, how to improve access and implementation. And what I would like us to see is to ensure that we have worker access to flexibility as a public right, that if we're going to offer these policies, we need to help workplaces with interventions such as training, so they don't merely react to work-family conflict or think about we're offering flexibility, but they don't have supportive cultures. We need to look at frontline workers and people with low flexibility access and not leave them out of the flexibility support discussion. And we need to look at new forms of needs. I mean, 30% of employees or more are living alone now. Single persons are not having families. They need to be viewed as having flexibility life or support. And we shouldn't put everything on the manager. We need to train workers too and link this as a sustainable practice. So I'm going to stop here, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. I think both talks have given us all kinds of interesting questions to think about. And so we have about half an hour now for questions and answers. You can pose a question in two ways. There's a react button at the bottom of your screen that you can use to raise your hand if you'd like, or if you would prefer to post a question in the chat, you can do that also. And I'll try to organize our discussion, move from one question to the next, no matter how they get posted. So, I think to get us started off, I'd like to ask Lauren a question. We'll give Ellen a little bit of a break here since she just finished her talk. I'm sure we'll come back to her. Lauren, I was really fascinated by this idea that your respondents and their families, and to some extent their employers even, might all be involved in this relational work that you described in order to uphold this, the myths that they had, the sort of obfuscation of the importance of women's work. And I was a little surprised that the women you interviewed and other people might be so willing to talk with you about that, to sort of recognize openly that they are sort of hiding a truth. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that. When and where might the women have been comfortable doing that? To what extent did they recognize that openly? What was that like?
That's a great question. I want to recognize, and I think I get into this a bit in the paper, how there's kind of different audiences, right? So sometimes this work of concealing is just something that women take on by themselves, or, involving third parties. Sometimes it's between spouses, sometimes it's between two different family members or more. And then sometimes it is kind of a family performance for the rest of, society, let's say. And so I did have a few instances where, it was only over the course of an hour or two when those pieces kind of started falling together, or people did admit to kind of doing this work, right? And using women's wages in really kind of basic ways. I will say as well that when I did some follow-up interviews this past year, I learned more information. So Layla, for example, actually shared that she'd been spending quite a bit more on her family than she let me know the first time around. So, I think actually these might be kind of conservative estimates, right, of what women are actually contributing. Thanks.
Interesting. Thank you. Ellen, Jennifer Hook has a question. Jennifer, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll ask a question for Ellen. First, Lauren, Ellen, thank you for the presentations. It was really lovely to hear about both of these award-winning articles. Ellen, this is, I think, a little beyond what you presented today, but I'm really interested in the manager training, and maybe it's because I'm a new department chair, so I'm thinking a lot more about management these days than I may previously have. So, this is really powerful findings, right? That a 4-hour training can make a difference in employees' lives. When you're thinking about these trainings and what you would sort of recommend for organizations and employers, do you see these trainings as something that can accomplish these effects in a lasting way from, say, an initial 4-hour onboarding training? Or do you really see these trainings as something that needs to be incorporated routinely into the fabric of an organization to maintain sort of positive effects on employee outcomes?
Great question. And I know I rushed through the training content, which could be its own ideas. I think it needs to be done regularly, just like we go through training and records each year. But I think part of this is it needs to be done as an organizational at the org level as part of an ongoing conversation. So we all know that we learned during the pandemic, for example, different ways of managing flexibility or how to do teaching by Zoom. And I don't do a ton of consulting, but I have done a little bit because I feel like if you're a professor, you should learn how companies are implementing. So for one organization, there was a CEO with a autistic child, and he believed in flexibility. So you first trained at the leader level management retreat, and the managers get through flexibility on their own needs. And then for the next year, they offered training voluntarily to and the leaders get trained in similar areas, and also I think offering training to employees. And then I think it's an ongoing conversation every year. How is it working on flexibility? How are we covering each other? So I think right now we're not even implementing these interventions very well at companies, and I think it should just be work life this year. What can we do better? And by the way, the families, some of these tools are free at Purdue. I have some on the website. I'm at the Center for Families as well.
Thank you, Ellen. We have a question by Melissa Milkey. Go ahead, Melissa.
Hi, everyone. You can hear me? Okay, great. Fabulous presentations. It's absolutely a testament to the Kanter Award, just finding these brilliant pieces. So excited to see them. I had a question similar to the first one for Lauren, and just thinking about these stories, it's so fascinating to me, trying to make this a gendered presentation and so on. And you used the term, and it was on your slide, family stories, I think you said. And I found that fascinating to think about in terms of just a symbolic interactionism, social psychological way that people live and speak about themselves and their family members. But I wondered to what extent it's, the truly family story where you saw the conflicts or not, whether they spoke about those. And then you also talked brilliantly about the extended family. And I wonder if, how extensive is it when we say family? If you could speak to some of that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Yeah, I mean, I think, these uphold some kind of, family myth, to use Hochschild's term, right? And, that's a communal story, right? So, women also tell other stories about economic independence, right? Or, not needing a man or being self-sufficient, right? And those are really different than these communal stories. I think, of course, yeah, these are kind of one account. There were, instances, where people did narrate kind of conflict in terms of, let's say, shared bank accounts, or making physical payments, or right, with kind of broader audiences. And those are conflicts that also take place between a married couple and a natal family, right? When you have kind of competing obligations, and it's exactly this kind of that really extended family, right? Where it's not just natal family, not just a married couple with their children, but thinking about aunts and uncles and others who, sisters-in-law and brothers-in-law who also make claims to women's money. That's what I'm really hoping to get into in this next study with Wimitha Kimbuthi at Princeton, right? So looking at another context where extended family ties are really upheld, even with, let's say, rural to urban migration. If we can look at one thing that I'm specifically interested in looking at here is the marital status, right? So how do these claims change when women are unmarried versus when they're married, and at the point of marriage too, around things like dowry. I hope I answered some of
Fascinating. Thank you so much.
We have a question in the chat for Lauren, also from Leah Ruppanner. How do you think your findings can be applied to other countries or contexts? Do you think these help us theoretically to understand what's happening in other parts of the world?
Thank you for that question, Leah. And I mean, I think, yes, absolutely. There's, some ways in which, we've really thought about extended family financial relations as, a phenomenon of the global South. It's not only, actually, right? And I think this has kind of clear implications for families in the global north as well. So I think really looking at what those extended family obligations look like, especially intergenerationally, I think that's really an area where we can kind of dig a little bit deeper in other places. We see that in migration research, right? But thinking more broadly there. And then I think these, what's the end goal of this kind of relational work? In the UAE, it's really about supporting an extended family, right? And upholding men's dignity when that's especially difficult. And so all of the kind of concealment really has to do with keeping the family unit strong and cohesive in that sense. But we can think about, does that look different in other contexts, right? So thinking about kind of individual versus familial goals and culture, I think that's one possible extension. And also thinking about differences in legal context. So the UAE is really, another Gulf country is unique in that men have a legal responsibility to provide as husbands and fathers. And so thinking about how much that actually shapes some of this activity, right? The stakes are really high to kind of uphold this image of men's breadwinning. We can think about, changes in legal and cultural context. And a last point I'll say is, thinking about kind of class comparisons and how much is this something that can be done? These women are paying for basic family needs, but they're not subsistence needs, right? And so thinking about, how much need and class context shapes this kind of relational work is something that I'm hoping to dig into further in the Kenyan context with a working class, middle class comparison. Thanks.
Thank you, Lauren. We have another question. Go ahead, Ariane.
Yes, my question is for Ellen, although thank you both so very much. I've enjoyed the presentations a lot. So Ellen, I really appreciate the focus on managers because they are the most proximal levers for action for improving flexibility in the workplace. And I am curious about how you convey the training to the managers, because as you said yourself, some of it is, well, they should already have the skills. Like if you never talk to your employees, you're not going to know what's happening in their life and you can't help them. So how do you convey the training without them feeling a bit dumb or, feeling that they should have thought about it? How do you approach the managers?
Great. So the university I worked with had it was called like what was it? The engagement study or engagement initiative. So this employee engagement initiative. And I didn't show it because of confidentiality, but I did interviews. I have video of people at the organization where leaders are talking about how flexibility benefits them. So it's like, it was like be the head of the food service. If I'm flexible with Bob, he's going to be more flexible with me when I need him to work long hours. So it was really kind of more how to support your people and, improve productivity on the job. And it also, in the boundary management section, they get feedback on their own work life. And managers think about their own supervisor support. So I think I have another paper I'm working on frontline managers. And so I think part of this is just help, was just communicate as part of this engagement initiative. There was I think an email from the head of HR, but it was completely voluntary because that's hard, right? Because probably the better managers probably want to get trained, right? But because it's a work group, because we had the control groups, you do show the power of it. I just don't think you can legally require managers to change how they manage people, but it's more, how do you become a more effective manager? And I've written papers actually with Marcello Russo and Matt Perugino and Gabrielle Monder on work-life leadership, supportive leadership, and how the leadership literature and the work-life literature really overlaps in thinking about how to manage people, but they don't view work-life support as part of leadership. So we did, I think, use leadership in some of the communications. Thanks for that question.
Thank you, Ellen. I have another question for you. I'm really interested in the example that you provided at one point about people working at home. You had a picture of a mother doing something for work on the sofa next to her kids. And it makes me wonder about remote work, the ability to do that, and how often it might end up being what we could call a work-friendly response to work-family conflict, in the sense that it makes it easier for employees to sort of bring their work home with them. It makes it easier for work responsibilities to interfere with what's going on inside the home. And I was wondering if you could talk a little about that. It seems, in my mind, sort of different in that unique way from offering people flexibility in terms of when they work or how many hours they work.
Yeah, and I think I could found a little bit in sharing. I mean, at a university, there is some flexibility often where people work, and we purposely didn't do measure even though schedule. What is your work schedule? When you fill it out, it can include your location. I think what other studies show is that often women, I hate to be gendered, but that there's work intensification and family intensification where there's multitasking going on, where some employees are trying to do both, caring for their kids and doing their work at the same time, and it's not good. So I think actually, you want to be friendly on a snow day. We know people have to work at home, whatever, but I think long term, training employees how to manage remotely. For example, IBM did a study that found if you had a door to your office at home, that helped you be more productive, and it singles to your, high school kids or that you're working. And I think we need to train people on how to work. Next study I would like to do, whoever's listening here, is I think we should compare location. I think I've just tried to do a meta-analysis on dependent care and age and some other things, and our studies do not measure the age of the children very well and what their care arrangements are, nor for elder care, is your parent in your same city or somewhere else. And I think we should look at remote workers if they have childcare in their home compared to employees that have childcare out of the home that are remote workers, and see how their well-being is. And I think it's probably going to vary with the age of the child. When you have a young child, and if you have a babysitter there or something. So I think there's a lot of training to be done. And people who live in cities, for example, or, if we go to our first speaker, it might be that women can't work outside of the home, right? But you're still expected to watch children. So I think there's, and you don't have a big house. So I know for the UN goals on equality and sustainability or social goals, they're viewing work from home as a way to support gender equality and sustainability. But I don't think it's a solution for everything unless we also help with childcare and techno, having good internet and things like that. Moving work into the home is complicated.
Yes. I see here maybe a bit of an overlap in that way between your work and what Lauren was studying, in that in both scenarios, I think it's also probably important to think about social norms. I can't remember off the top of my head where I read this, but I seem to recall some research showing that when men work at home, they're less likely to be interrupted by their families than women are. And that reflects, in some ways, the kinds of things Lauren was talking about, the the way we think about the meaning we attach to women's work. Apparently in the US at least, we have this this idea, right, that women's paid work is it's more okay to interrupt it, I guess, or something like that, right? And that cultural norms are important. I don't know how you can't you can't go and train everybody, right? You can't
Well,
go and
and
train families to think differently about it, but that seems to me to be a important thing to consider.
just really, really quick, I did a study for the National Academy of Management on STEM women's work-life boundary experiences during the pandemic, and it published in Journal of Applied Psychology. It's called Pushing the Boundaries. And we found these were like 765 STEM faculty members. First off, many of them with young children had set it up so they were doing their work on campus and had childcare out of the home, so that was difficult. But when it came into the home, the men that had a job where they could work at home, there was a power struggle and more men had the better office. And one woman would report working in a closet and trying to hide from her kids. I'm joking, but not joking on the last part, but that there is how space is used in the home has some gender norms. And I don't know if our first speaker wants to comment on that at all either, but
Yeah, I would love to hear what Lauren has to say about the gender norms that she encountered and how she thinks they may be changing over time. You were collecting data over a fairly long period. One of the things that really struck me was that you said the government was sort of creating more opportunities for women in the workforce, and men were being to some extent pushed out. I was a little surprised to hear that. It sounded like the government in that way was sort of ahead of the curve compared to at least some people's beliefs or attitudes about what women should be doing. And that's an interesting situation to watch how norms change and how quickly and so forth. Maybe you could offer a few comments about any change that you saw or what you think might happen in the future, especially with the government encouraging women to go into paid work.
Yeah, absolutely. The state has been doing two big things at the same time in the labor market, right? So promoting women's employment largely through public employment. So about 9 in 10 Emirati women who are in the labor force, they're working for the government, right? So that's federal and emirate, which is kind of equivalent to state level. And then at the same time, they've been trying to privatize the workforce. So that's why reducing the number of public employees and men have been really impacted by that. And that's why you see some of these struggles around, stereotypes about women citizens, because the private sector is really dominated by foreign workers or expatriates who have all kinds of ideas about locals, as they're called. And, it's this kind of conflict which has generated some frustration with the state on the part of men. And I have another paper about how they kind of manage their feelings about that, right? I will say, so that, the state is doing a lot in terms of promoting women's employment, but the kind of visibility in which jobs are acceptable has been a bit has been gradual, right? So there's kind of norms around visibility, having your likeness distributed. So there's a lot of women going into, still very feminized occupations, education, culture. You have a lot of women working for kind of museums and heritage work. But I will say, I think there's a lot of kind of backlash, or at least, frustration with the position that men are finding themselves in. But it's really about their economic position and less so about giving women the opportunity to earn outside the home. Men find themselves in this new bind. So I will say that's one thing that, you know, the state citizens can be a bit more progressive than the state might portray them. And then a final thing I would say, there was a great study in Saudi Arabia where they did a survey with men, kind of checking support for women's employment outside the home. And what they found is that everyone was much more supportive of it than they thought other people were. And so they did an experiment where they gave them that information. It's called misperceived norms, and they found that actually raised women's labor force participation, and men were helping their wives find work outside the home, right? So, you know, I think there's kind of ways in which, you know, just those misperceived norms even can have a life of their own.
Fascinating. Just to follow up a little bit on that, one of the things that I did not hear you talk about, I think, was women who were working for pay who told you that they would prefer not to do that. And I was wondering if that was something that ever came up. It seems like one of the things that could happen, but maybe it doesn't very often. You would imagine that the social norms about women not earning for pay would also be internalized to some extent by some women, and maybe to the extent that they would actually prefer not to work even though they currently are.
Mm-hmm. No, actually, yes. A few women did share that sentiment with me, and some of that has to do with, you know, if this is kind of the normative arrangement that it's men's responsibility to provide for the family, women feel a bit cheated or perhaps taken advantage of if it seems like men are sort of slacking, right? Or not wanting to provide or step up in the way that they're supposed to, especially when women are still expected to be the primary caregivers and you know, guardians of the household, right? So there's this concern, especially among young unmarried women, of potentially being taken advantage of, right? Of course, men are, you know, to be fair, men are struggling, given kind of changes to what the employment options look like. But that's definitely a factor. You know, I did have some women who said, you know, as soon as we're done paying for this, I'm done. And, you know, and I want to get out of the workforce. And then when I did my follow-up interviews after the pandemic, I also found that women who had been given flexibility during the pandemic to really juggle their office job over Zoom and childcare at home, they felt really disillusioned when they were expected to come back full-time to the workplace, and found that they couldn't keep up that same arrangement. So I did have some women, you know, expressing to me how they felt a little bit like they've been sold this vision of empowerment, and it wasn't all that it was, you know, set up to be.
I have a question, Lauren. In some, and I don't know if it's right for your country, but I know in some countries women still can't own property and inherit. Is context about that and where you did your study?
So in the UAE, women can own property, and many women, especially, you know, the kind of middle class, upper class elites, absolutely earn property. It's very common to have
Right.
investment properties, and that's one thing that, you know, women will think of as kind of a safety net if they need to stop working when they get married, for example. There's this idea that, you know, being a property owner is a way to kind of hedge your bets. So actually, interestingly, that's a really, you know, there's a lot of new construction, and there are certain kind of citizenship privileges in terms of, you know, state support for owning property, and so that's something which is actually kind of a really interesting, you know, more passive income strategy. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you everyone for your questions. Thank you, Ellen and Lauren, for your wonderful presentations. I encourage everybody to go and read their work in black and white and cite it, of course. Please join me in thanking them and all the people who helped make this event possible.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you so much.